Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Rough Riders, where I am interviewing indie authors pretty much every day right now. It's very busy for me. But yeah, this is going to be a regular series here on my channel. It's fun to get to know other indie authors who are pretty active online and who have books out there. So today I've got with me another fantasy author, except his subgenre of fantasy is a really unique one that I, as a person who's fairly ignorant of fantasy, was not aware of. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say. And this is going to be yet another learning experience for me because this entire thing has just been proving to me that I know way less than I thought I did. So yeah, today I've got S.M. Campbell with me. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, as I just said, you're writing in a subgenre of fantasy that I'm unfamiliar with. On your website, I was reading your author bio, and you described it as ocean punk fantasy, which just the name the name on its own sounds pretty badass to me. So it's going to be cool to hear about your books and then just what that genre is all about. So I guess we'll start where I've started all of these so far. And I'm just going to ask you kind of your background. Like, how did you get started with all of this?
Yeah, sounds good. And for the purposes of the interview, you can call me Seth. You don't have to call
Okay.
me S. You don't have to call me SM.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, there was one situation where I was like the entire time I was using someone's initials and I was like, should I be doing this? I'm not sure. So, okay, Seth, why don't you
Yep.
tell us who are you?
All right. Yeah. So I'm Seth Campbell. Go by SM Campbell on my books, and I have only been publishing, like writing with the intent of publishing for about a year now. And but I've always been kind of a creative. Um, really have a big passion for like board games. So it's like as long as I can remember, I was like drawing comics, creating board games, playing them, observing them. A student of nerdy pop culture for for as far back as my memory will allow. My background um, is varied and long, but the short of it is, I thought I was gonna be a hit film director and went to undergrad to be a film major and realized that that wasn't the path for me. That it was probably going to lead me to be like a professor of film studies somewhere. Didn't want to do that. Was failing out of college. Ended up uh, jumping in the theater department, finding out that you could do set design, like the building and props design and all of that. That was like right up my alley. Went full hog into that and ended up working professionally for a little bit, going back to grad school to use that to get a master's degree in it, and then was in that field for quite a while up until about 2.5 years ago, 2 3 years ago. It Now that I have a family, little kids, it wasn't really working because I didn't really have the passion for theater. I have a passion for creating, but the schedules and everything were just not lending itself to my lifestyle, and I was feeling creatively drained, and got out of that. And so now I actually work in construction, doing a lot of what I did. I do design and budgeting for a construction company, so was able to transfer those skills over to something and work in a more consistent environment, which has re-sparked my creativity. And so I was like getting back into board game creation and all sorts of hobby projects. And the what we will end up talking about, my series, uh, was actually some cosplay and board game ideas that got way too big until my wife said, "Why don't you just write the book?" And so I did.
I feel like significant others are always the ones who can like really push
Yep.
you into actually doing it.
Yes.
If only because they're just tired of hearing you
They're like,
like talk about
exactly.
that. So let me just say, having known some people who work in set design, I have so much respect for that because I feel like you don't get enough credit when it comes to stuff because people always end up taking the sets for granted and
Yeah.
someone has to make them. So
Yes.
so yes, I have a lot of respect for you with that, and that's really cool. And then
Well,
I
you're
know,
one of the first people I've kind of really met outside of the field, like that knows what I mean when I say set designer. I have to explain it a lot, so
Hmm.
that's cool.
Yeah, my stepdad used to do that.
Cool.
And like for the community theater, and he would always have to build the stuff for these big productions, and he was really good at it. But you know, people just end up that's not what they're focusing on. But if it was missing, they would definitely miss it. So
Yes. Yep.
so yeah. But I know you were saying I had read in your author bio that after you kind of switched to construction, that gave you a lot more time to actually be creative. So that's been actually a kind of common theme among the people that I'm talking to about how hard it is to actually find time to do any of this stuff. I've certainly learned that over time that like I had made a video a long time ago talking about like, oh, you know, you're not going to be able to find time to write. You have to make time to write. And I feel like I presented it in a way that almost I kind of regret it now because I'm like, it almost sounded like I was saying if you're not writing, then like you suck.
Yeah.
And I've since learned that life gets in the way. It
Yeah.
really does.
It does, and not just make time, but make energy. Like that was it. You know, when in one reason I kind of left the field. Like even when I did have time, about the only thing that I was able to do that I was kind of enjoying was painting models, because I couldn't invest creative energy in world creation, writing. I had a graphic novel project I was working on that I just let totally go. But I was creatively drained, and so even if you have the time, sometimes like making the mental space to do it is a challenge to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Well, burnout's a real thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
you know, I work in healthcare. So, I
Oh,
mean, some people would maybe argue that plastic surgery is not really healthcare, but it's still medicine. And burnout is a big, big, big,
yeah,
big thing. So, like I would get home and I was just so exhausted from basically having to schmooze patients all day and then deal with post-op problems and then deal with this or that or have to get up at like, you know, 4 in the morning to go into the OR and help out with stuff. Like by the time you get home, even if I had like 4 or 5 hours to kill where I could have theoretically written, I was just like the only like I don't want to do anything. Like I really don't. Like I don't have the capacity for that right now.
yeah,
So yeah, no, it sucks. And I mean, like people talk about writer's block and all of that, and sometimes it's just you've got no energy left. Like
yeah,
there's no way
yeah,
around
and
it.
that's yeah, and that can be where it stems from, and yeah,
Hmm.
it's tough,
Yeah. Well,
and
at
there's
least
no
now
easy
you've had some
solution.
time. Yeah. No, there really isn't. And but at least now you've had some time and you've been productive with that time.
Yes,
Because you've got 2 novels out right now, which looks like will be part of a series of 7 novels
yes,
total.
yeah. So I've
Um,
got 2 novels and a novella. So yeah,
Nice. So the first one is called Corrupted Tides,
yep,
and you put that out at the it was December of last
yep,
year, I think, right? And
yep.
then the one after that, the second book is Tainted Seas. Great name. And
Thank you.
actually both of them are great names. And that one that just came out actually. That
Yep,
was June 9th. So
yep,
like less than a month ago. So
yep.
um so I'm gonna ask you this because I am and I've said this to other people, and I'm just going to say it again, so everyone who's watching is going to get sick of me saying this. But I'm slow as shit when it comes to writing. I initially said that I didn't really want to curse that much on these, but I'm like, you know what? I curse a lot naturally. I might as well. So I'm really slow when it comes to writing. And then other people are way faster than that, and I have a ton of respect, and I'm always impressed by it. But you put those books out basically like 6 months apart. So had you written had you like finished one and then had most like the second one mostly complete by the time you published the first one, or did you publish the first one and then immediately get to writing the second one like from scratch and then were you able to finish it in a pretty quick amount of time?
No, I started the second one about a month or two before the first one published. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do write fast. And so I potentially wrote the first one too fast, because I learned a lot, and how to give
Mm-hmm.
myself more time. But I do write fast. I can kind of get and when I say rough draft, my rough drafts are closer to a first draft because I'll try not to ramble here, but I can
Ramble as
usually
much
get
as you want. It's the
I can
point.
get my we'll call it my first, first-ish draft out pretty quick, um, within like 1 to 3 months, and kind of roll into it. Just kind of depends on the word count. But one thing that has helped, and so I kind of briefly mentioned this earlier, is this was going to be a board game first. And when I say it was going to be a board game, it was going to be like an epic scale board game. Like I had the story, I had monsters, weapons. It was like going to be, in my dream world, a big Kickstarter game with models, and it was quest based. So I had these quests and these characters. So I had a lot of this world figured out, and say I haven't written sci-fi, but I've read quite a bit, and so there's definitely world building that has to happen, and especially if you're creating a world from scratch, and so I had a lot of that, and I had magic systems and everything, a lot of what I needed. Now, obviously, I had to adapt it to the story, but that was like 2 years worth of world building ready. So that meant, once I solidified the story into my arc that I wanted, then I could kind of plug and play and get that going pretty quick. And then, yes, on top of that, I write pretty fast when I get into the zone. And so I came into indie publishing knowing that I wanted to publish quick. I researched a couple of different routes, and I wanted to be like in that kind of mid range of maybe trying to hit a book a quarter, or 3 to 4 books a year. And so I knew that as soon as the first book was kind of at a place that it was ready or in different hands, then I needed to start the second one, and I've repeated that with the third book. So like I am a third plus the way through the a draft of the third book.
Nice. Nice. So you're like well on your way to actually doing a 7-book series, which is
Yes.
it's a lot. Like I've done a series of, I always say short stories just because it's easier to say that, but they're like kind of somewhere between a short story and a novella, like in terms of word count. But I've done a series of those to accompany my sci-fi novel, which will hopefully be a trilogy if I ever actually get around to finishing the second one, which is like a quarter written right now. But even just writing like a series of short stories like that is like that's tough. So having like a kind of continuous series going on of full length novels is it's like a big undertaking. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I'm there's I'll say that there's nights where I'm thinking, did I bite off more than I can chew? But we're pressing it. We're going. I haven't hit the wall yet. So
yeah. Well, I mean, it's good that you've already got 2 of them out, because I feel like a thing that can happen, and this is something that I feel like is an issue with my sci-fi book right now, is that it's supposed to be part of a series, but I've only got 1 novel available to readers, and that's been out for a while actually. Like I haven't taken the time to really continue it. So that book's been out for like a decent number of years at this point. So if you do manage to get someone to read it, which is awesome, then they're like, well, where's the next one? So it's good that you already have more than one, because it's going to give you some extra time to actually write the next one without losing people.
And that was part of kind of my idea going into this. Like I have a release schedule in mind, but I knew this first year would be pretty critical, and so like I want to get this third book out in the winter. Now, whether that's December or February, it's still winter, but still within that 6 to 8 month period. If for some reason things have to slow down a little bit, also people are not quite reading the second book yet because they're still reading the first one. So it's totally fine. But I want to try to get the third book out, and then, buy myself some time. I'm looking at a second series too, then to start rotating in there. And so if things need, we're going to keep going, but if it's not a 6 month period between each book, that's fine. There's 3 books out now, and it buys me some time.
So I mean, the novella that you wrote is called Salvage, and it's an Eldritch Depth story. So Eldritch Depth is the series name, right? Or like the world. So is that'll also be a series, it sounds like, right? So
They're, they are I don't want to say standalones. Some of them are standalones. Some of them have to do with the larger lore.
mhm,
But I've got 9 of them planned, and they are kind of like my little in betweens each book. And so to help me kind of satiate the readers and also give myself a break in the process, because if you finish something, you can put it into one step of the process and keep going on another one. Then you're rotating them like a like an assembly line,
mhm.
and
Well, I
so
love that because I did the same thing, or a similar thing. So I have
mhm,
my novel is called The Eighth Verse. That is the first novel in what's supposed to be a trilogy. And then I have a series, the short stories I was talking about, which is called Aether
yep,
Tales. So that is like there's supposed to be sort of like, I guess the idea was that I was going to sort of build canon with it.
yes,
If God willing, this ever became like a thing, then and this was like widely known and people were really into it, then it would be that would sort of build up the lore even more and kind of expand the universe while at the same time giving me a chance to work on the books and give people something to read. So because these didn't take nearly as long,
yeah,
yeah, I'll say I actually enjoy writing a novel more than I like writing a short story, which is kind of bizarre. But I just feel like it's hard for me to condense things in a good way
yeah.
for something short.
I would agree with that. Like I'm enjoying them to an extent, and they're very fun for the world, but they're challenging in a completely different way, because I'm trying to keep mine between 20 and 40,000 words, and I'm trying to tell a story that could be a 2-hour movie.
Hmm.
That's a lot of heavy lifting you've got to do in a short
Yeah,
story, especially if they're characters that haven't been introduced yet, or you're bringing in new concepts even from a world you've already developed. Yeah, they're definitely challenging. Nobody should ever really look at a short story and be like, oh, that's easy. It's not.
yeah, no, I entirely agree, and I feel like that's something that people see a short story, they think, oh, it's short, therefore must not have been a whole lot of work. No,
No.
no, for for some people at least, it
Yeah.
is. So, I'm picturing almost like the way like Rogue One and Solo and all those are like, sort of not filler movies because I love Rogue One.
Yep.
I think that is easily the best one that Disney has done. Not to make this about sci-fi, but it's sort of along those lines where you're
Yeah.
just building stuff up even more while keeping it sort of separate from the main series, but
Exactly.
still tying into it. Uh,
Exactly.
so do people have to, like, can people read the novella that you've written and then hypothetically the future ones that you're going to write? Can they read that without having read the series or vice versa? Like, will it really affect anything?
Some of them. So like the first one, Salvage, and I have had some people read it who hadn't read the first one, and they got it. But there are some clues in there to the larger story that, like, if you've read the main series, you're going to be like, ooh, that's a really interesting thing I didn't know. If you didn't, you won't get the reference, but you'll still get a really good story. The next one I'm working on might need a little, like, I do sort of want it to be a standalone, but it's also coming after the second book, so like they're gonna get a little harder to do, and they're labeled, Eldritch Story 1, 2, 3. They're not all the same characters, but you pick up two and then the Eldritch Step stories, you should probably be aware that you might not know all the context to the world. So they're going to get less so, but and it's going to be harder to communicate to people which ones you can and which ones you can't. And I'm Brandon Sanderson. A lot of people have that difficulty. You kind of rely at some point on your audience to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do have two coming up, and I've got some more, but like there's two in particular I can think of. One is like a Western train heist, but on a sea train. And that's kind of all it is. It's not really going to be about the main story. It's just going to be like a fun adventure novel with maybe some little clues at things. And another one's going to be like the Hateful Eight, but underwater. And there might be little stuff that, if you know the larger world, then you get those clues, but you could probably read them by yourselves. But those are like books, like those are novellas like 5 and 6. And so if I saw Elder Step Stories number 5 on the shelf, I wouldn't know. So it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be kind of hard to tell people that they can read it by themselves.
So I didn't check that. I should have when I was looking at all your stuff on Amazon. So are like my short stories slash novella slash novelette, whatever you want to call it. They are I only have them as ebooks because they're too short for me to really print.
Hmm.
Um, are yours ebooks or are they also in print? Or I don't know if they were long enough
They're
to
both.
actually print it. Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah,
So
they're both. And so I am gonna change it up a little bit for the next one. Like I'm gonna release it on Kindle Vella first, and then
cool.
when it's all the way out. Well, and I'm doing it because I saw your video on Kindle Vella, and I was
Oh,
like,
oh,
yeah,
look
and
at that.
because
Okay.
I'd heard about it, but I didn't
Mhm.
know anything about it, and I watched your video, and I was like, that sounds amazing. And so I researched it after you were talking about it, and that's what I'm going to be doing for my novellas now. Is I'm going to release them on Kindle Vella and on my Substack first, and build up a little interest and time because, like you're saying, like the short stories, they take time. They also take money. Like the
Mhm.
cover, the cover costs are
Yeah.
still there, and yeah, to get it to be a full, so it's about 100 pages, and I had to insert some art in there to kind of get it. And so, it's small. You can read it in about 4 hours,
Hmm.
um, but it's barely printable.
Yeah. Well, I'm first of all, I'm happy that you saw my video. I
Oh
always
yeah,
like that. But Vela seems like a really cool option. I
yeah,
wish to God that I was the kind of person that I think could pull it off, but I really don't think I am. But I know a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, but I know a good number of people now who have done it and actually did better on Kindle Vella than they did with actually putting out a full-length novel.
yeah,
And I think I don't know, it's almost like podcasting for books in a
yes,
way. And I feel like that sort of format does so well now because people like to have a shorter kind of regular series of things than to actually sit down and read, like, spend a lot of time invested in one works. So I don't know if that's the reason why it's done well, or if it's the fact that the way that people pay is with tokens and not necessarily dollars. So maybe they're a little bit more uh, willing to, it's easier to spend money on something when you're seeing like, oh, it's 2 tokens and not like,
yeah,
$5 or something. But whatever it is, it's been working pretty well from them, and then you can always like release them later in like a consolidated version. So
exactly.
yeah, so it's definitely a good option, and I think it'll be cool to see what you're able to do with it, because I can say for myself, I am not even going to try because there's no way I'll be able to keep up with it. I could barely put videos out on the same day every week. So there's
Well, yeah, that's and I thought about going into. I'm going to treat it like I'm writing it to go to print. I'm going to write the
Mhm.
whole thing, and you know find. I try to keep my short stories around 10 to 14 chapters, but the first 10 episodes of Kindle Vella are free. So what the next step is, I'll write it with that in mind, and I'm going to try to like find a stopping point in each chapter, so that then each chapter is like 2 episodes. So I'm going to
Mhm.
write this whole thing, and then just set it up to uh, automatically upload every week.
Yeah.
So I'm going to write the whole thing and just let it go,
Mhm. Yeah.
and we'll see what happens.
It's kind of like batching videos, which I used to do, where I would do
Yes,
like a ton of them in one week and then just like not have to do anything for a
yeah,
few months, which I
because
need to start doing again. I swear.
I tried like some weekly blog stuff because I was actually I was streaming some board games a while back, and I was writing some stories of the game I was playing, and I was trying to write those every week. I couldn't keep up, and so I'm like, no, I
Hmm.
just need to write it as the book that I intend it to be when I eventually get it out there. And then I will just logically break it up and not change my process,
That makes
and
so
just
much
go
sense.
from there.
Yeah, I like I end up, so I have my blog. I don't really like promote it a lot on TikTok because it's all videos. But like pretty much every video I do has a blog post that mirrors it. Sometimes it's like not word for word. Other times when I'm not feeling creative, the video is me like almost reading verbatim what I had written. But at this point, since I'm not like batching them anymore, I have to write them every week. And then sometimes it's really easy, like it's an easy post, and other times I'm like, holy crap, like I can't come up with anything. And it's hard to meet a schedule when you do it like that. So if you just do it all ahead of time, your life is going to be so much easier. So
Yeah.
I think that that's going to be a really good tactic for you. So,
Yeah.
so I want to ask about your books themselves and give
Yep.
you a chance to really talk about them. But before I do that, I want to bring this up because I thought this was really interesting and a good idea. Your books, both of them, I think, have just the regular version that is available, and then you have a clean version for each of
Yes.
them. So I never even thought about doing that, and that's actually a really good idea because it would have spared me the embarrassment of having my grandmother read some of the stuff that I have written. That I am I'm horrified to think that she has seen it. But what made you decide?
I sent the
Is
clean
that
version to my grandmother.
yeah, good call because it is so weird. But I had never seen that before, so that's a really cool idea. Had you seen that done before? You came up with that yourself, and like, what kind of drove you to do that?
Yeah, I had not. I mean, like, I kind of like was thinking of it like a TV movie type, like,
Hmm.
TV edit. Um, no, so I live in, it's not a small town, but we live in like a town of 45,000 people. You
Hmm.
kind of know everybody. It's my wife's town. And, going into the series, I knew I was going to make it pretty explicit in everything. And, and was always kind of like playing in the back of my head, what happens if I need to like maybe pull back on this, or do I need to have a different version? And I wasn't sure if I was going to do it. And then had met someone online, another author, and her son had really become obsessed with the world, and was like watching all my world building videos and all of that. And she said that she was going to end up having to just read the book to him. And uh, and I was like, you know what, I kind of set the book up so that I would be easily able to edit it down um, to a clean version. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And so I did it, and and then it doesn't sell as much, but it's also, yeah, like, it's an interesting thing that people kind of look at and they're like, oh, that's fascinating. Um, so that I decided I'm just going to do that for all the main series. It doesn't do anything about the violence, so I don't
Hmm.
censor the violence at all, but it does censor the spice content, as we say on TikTok,
Yeah.
and and the language.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good idea because I feel like it can kind of, I don't think how to word this, can almost shield you from the kind of criticism that is more about like the content than it is about the actual writing. Like the kinds of
Yes.
people who read it and they're not really like they'll review it badly, not because they're saying that it was a bad book, but they're like, oh, I just didn't feel that all the language was necessary, or like, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't need to hear that sex scene or something. Like it's which okay, fine, like that's their personal preference, but it always drives me
Right.
crazy if that's their. I'm like, that's your thing that you have to say, like it's not that, oh, this the plot was whatever or this or that, like that's it. So that kind of removes that the
Yeah,
risk
it
of that.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of helps with that. It also, like, that's the only version I'm selling in our local bookstore.
Hmm.
That's the version I've given to, some family members and friends.
Cool.
Um,
I want to ask you about that, what you just said. So selling at your local bookstore. I talked to another author who was doing something similar. And I don't know a lot of people who have done that because I think a lot of people don't focus on their local community. They
yeah.
tend to think like, I'm going to go online and I'm going to appeal to the world. And when sometimes it's good to start small. So how do you go about doing that? Because now that I've heard two different people say that they're doing that, I'm like, well, I don't know if people. So I'm in Vegas. I don't know if people in Vegas read. They're more likely to go to like a strip club. But I don't know. There's probably bookstores somewhere. Maybe I could get it in there. But yeah, how do you go about doing that? Because that's just such a cool concept to me.
Yeah, it's probably going to be different for everybody. And I have heard people who've had terrible luck even at small independent bookstores. I was fortunate enough, so we only have the one bookstore, and it came under new management like a year ago. We don't have Barnes and Noble in our city, and
Hmm.
I really only did it just so I could have the clean version like in our town, and I could direct people there. It'd also be good marketing shots I can take with my book and put it on TikTok. So I went to the owner and asked her. Turns out they have a consignment deal. So
Mhm.
they don't have to buy my book from Ingram, which they can't buy the clean version because I only have that available on Amazon because I use the free ISBN
Okay, yeah.
um, for the clean
Mhm.
version.
Yeah.
So uh, so she said, yeah, I just you give me a handful of books and uh, we take some royalties off of that, and then if they don't sell, eventually we give them back. But then if they sell, you just bring us some new ones, and it saves them some costs, and all I got to do is provide her with some books.
That's
And
so
so
cool.
so for me, it worked out great.
The idea of being able to walk into a store and actually see your book there, even if it's just like a local
Yeah,
bookstore, is so
it's
cool because that's
it
like
is cool.
everyone's dream, you know? And
Yeah.
and I think I actually probably said this in response when that other author was saying this, but so this is like I'm just exhausted these days. I don't even know when I'm repeating myself, but you know, everyone dreams of having that, like especially when you're like an indie author and all you would love more than anything is to have your book sold in
Yeah.
person in a bookstore. It is so legit looking. And when you self-publish online, and like whether it's through like Ingram Spark, I use Ingram Spark, you use Ingram Spark, sounds like.
Hmm.
So when you go on one of those websites, like you're new to self-publishing, you've never done it
Yeah.
before, you have no idea what you're doing. You go on there and it has things like saying like get your book in bookstores because that's one of their distribution options is to bookstores, but it's presented in a way that sort of implies that it will automatically get into those
And it
bookstores, which it doesn't
it
work
won't.
like that.
Hmm.
So I think that people get disappointed after they're like, well, I used Ingram Spark, I used this or that, and I paid monies for the fees for setting up the title, and I did all of this, and I only see it online. Like
Yeah.
why did this happen? It's like, well, they have to actually request copies of your book. Like they
They
don't
have
just
to know
tip it
it
out.
exists. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
if you dig a little further, you see all those extra marketing options that come with Ingram that says now you push your books to the bookstores, or you have to go to a local Barnes and Noble and tell them. I have actually heard of some people who've struck consignment deals with their like Barnes and Nobles or Targets
Oh, really?
too.
Okay.
Yeah, and I haven't tried that with our Target, but I have seen some people who've done consignment deals with some bigger stores.
Hmm.
If the management's good, so it all
Nice.
kind of depends. So if anyone's out there is like looking at a Barnes and Noble in their town, you could try that too.
Hmm. Well, that's definitely a cool option. I wouldn't have imagined that a bigger like kind of corporate thing like that would be as receptive like or that they would even consider it. So
It
that's
probably
pretty
all
cool.
comes down to management, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. My big fear is that I would do it and then it would end up at like Dollar Tree or something instead of instead of a bookstore. But yeah, no, that's great that you got yours in there. So okay, the books that are in that bookstore, let's talk about those. So Corrupted Tides is book one. Again, great
Yep.
name. So
Thank
and
you.
then the series is the Eldritch Depth series.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about Corrupted Tides, and then and again, it is ocean punk fantasy is how you had described it. So
Yep.
you know what? Maybe tell me what that is before
Okay.
before we
Yeah.
even get to the book.
Let's start with the genre. So I didn't really know like ocean punk before I wrote these. At least I didn't know the name. I'm a steampunk fan. Cyberpunk. I'm a punk fan, so I love punk.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but ocean punk is so. I'm going to try to do this really really quick because I'm kind of obsessed with punk.
Okay.
Um, but the punk genre basically is it's literary and media genres that basically feature stories and characters that kind of go against the grain, buck the status quo, anti-establishment, some anti-authoritarian and anti-government vibes to it. It's because you think of punk, the 90s
Mm-hmm.
punk term, that's what they're doing, right? They're bucking against everything, anti-cultural, societal, uh, I can't think of the word, but
They're going against like norms
yeah,
and everything.
exactly.
Yeah.
The norms. Thank you.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
societal norms. And so you take that and then you put a descriptor in front of it, and that descriptor usually ties into like some sort of time period or aesthetic look. So steampunk is essentially like the ideals of like Victorian futurism. It's Victorian England vibes and technology, and then you throw in that punk aspect of of the anti-societal norms, and that's what creates steampunk. And cyberpunk is the same thing, and so you have this 80s neon aesthetic with the punk. Ocean punk then is you take that punk vibe and you throw in nautical and a lot of times these also have a little bit of a dystopian quality to them, is usually what usually goes along with a lot of the punk genre. So a classic example of ocean punk is Waterworld. And I
Hmm.
don't know if you're
Okay.
familiar with
Yes,
Waterworld.
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Hmm.
Waterworld's almost a little bit of like diesel punk meets ocean punk, because it was also kind of like described as like Mad Max on the water,
Hmm.
because it has that diesel vibe. So there's ocean punk, and then mine's actually a little more of pirate punk because it's more of the pirate aesthetic, the nautical, but ocean punk is easy. Um, they're kind of back and forth. But if you really delved into it, ocean punk could mean that it might be a little more on the, metal sailing ships and destroyed aircraft carriers and diesel engine, versus pirate punk, which would be more sails and ropes and
Hmm.
gears and pulleys.
Nice.
So that's it. That's ocean punk in a nutshell. And so
Okay.
ocean punk fantasy then, fantasy is the completely new world, deriving, using magic systems. So you throw magic in there and creatures, so you take the fantasy aspect, of a completely different universe and magic and new monsters and cultures, and you throw this almost sci-fi-ish ocean punk vibe on top of it and blend it together.
So all the different kinds of like the punk subcategory are largely distinguished by kind of like aesthetic then. So
Yes.
like okay, so it's very visual. Like when I hear steampunk, I have an image immediately in my head.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking like gears and cogs and like
Yeah. Uh,
dirigibles and all sorts of
yeah.
things like
I don't know
that.
if you're a
Yeah,
video game player, but like
I am. Yeah.
Bioshock Infinity
Okay.
is kind of in that steampunk vibe. Bioshock is definitely kind of a little bit of an ocean punk vibe.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, not a great movie, but that's steampunk
It's
to
a
its
guilty pleasure of
core.
mine. I actually just watched it for the first time in a while, maybe
Oh,
like a
really?
month
Oh,
ago, and I
I
was
love that
like, yeah,
movie.
I was like, I love this movie, but it is like,
Yes,
I mean, Sean Connery, I can do no wrong. So
yes.
yeah, so when I was watching it, it comes on and it starts in like Kenya or whatever, and I'm like, I don't really remember this movie at all. And then
Oh yeah,
Sean
Al
Connery walks out, and I
takes his glasses
screamed,
off.
and I was like, I forgot he was in this. But
I used to
yeah.
watch that movie a lot. Yeah, it's not a great movie, but I love it. But that movie is steampunk, right?
Mhm.
That movie, and then
Absolutely.
it starts to kind of go into some diesel punk era, because we're getting into the Edwardian phase there a little bit.
Hmm. So, okay, cool. Now we know what that is, and I know what that is. So, okay, corrupted tides. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so it takes place in a world completely covered in water, and we will find out more about the origins of the world as the series goes on. But the story when you start, or what the people know, is that there were the gods, Lomia and Fathus, so the gods of earth and the god of sea and the sun and the moon. The gods of earth and sea went to war, like several hundred years ago, 400, 500 years ago, and for some reason battled it out. Imagine like Greek, pantheons going at it, and Lomia lost the battle, and Fathus in his retribution flooded the world and like destroyed humanity, and whoever rose to the top survived, and the world is now full of eldritch monsters under the waters, and the merfolk creatures that were living in the different oceans have kind of consolidated and have their little empire into the sea, and humans now have had to make their lives on top of the water. There's no land other than some ice caps up in the north, and that's it. And so it's completely changed everything. And so you've got these different floating civilizations and small floating townships, and everything seafaring now. And we meet two characters, unrelated but characters to each other, though they do meet at the very end. One of them is Vila, and the other one is Nario. So Vila is we call her a blue lady, but she's like a high end escort essentially.
Okay.
And there's a lot of sordid history with her past that we kind of uncover as the story goes along. But she is a blue lady and a prize fighter, and so there's this like weird mesh of seduction and violence that is very much part of her character that we discover and are at conflict with each other. And she starts to uncover something that is corrupting the tides, as we will say.
There it is. Okay. Hmm.
Yep, and it seems to be something in celestial in nature, and so it's like, is it, are the gods coming? You know, are the gods mad again? What's happening? And you know, it's impacting her personal life, and so she lives on this floating city called the Planks, which is this like two-tiered city. There's a part, the upper planks, which is the floating part above, and then there's the lower planks, which is basically like the bowels of a ship, except it's a city.
Hmm.
And they're like two different civilizations. And she's from the lower planks. So we have this class divide, which is a big
Okay.
part of punk,
Yeah.
and anti government stuff. And so she's trying to figure out that. Meanwhile, Nario has been tasked, he's a thief from a totally different city. He gets picked up by this mysterious cult who says there's an item, this magical item, in the city of the Planks that we want because something is happening. You don't need to know anything more. All you need to know is that we'll kill you if you don't go get it. But here's some money if you do. You know,
Hmm.
and he's like, all right, fine, yeah. And so he sets out to the Planks to discover what the item is, and it turns out that there's a lot more stuff than everybody really knew what was happening, and that's going to continue through the rest of the series. So we follow those two characters as they're both unraveling their own little mysteries until all the crap hits the fan.
Cool. Really cool. I like that a lot. And so something that like I said this I think before we started even recording, that like the extent of my exposure to fantasy is largely like Game of Thrones and the Lord of the Rings, both of which have like a very 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 large cast of characters, and
Yes.
especially Song of Ice and Fire, that whole series has a ton of point of views. And when I wrote my sci-fi novel, if I were to go back and do it again, I would not have written from so many perspectives. I in later edits kind of trimmed it down, but it still was a lot more than I probably should have done. I like that for a fantasy novel, you limit it to two people, which I think makes it a lot more digestible to readers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
it's honestly it's better as an author. It's a little bit easier
yeah,
on you too.
make it easier on yourself. So I actually took cues from one of my favorite sci-fi series, The Expanse. I don't know if you've read that one.
I have not read the books,
You've
but
seen the
that
show though.
show, I love that show more than anything.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
if you love the show, I think you're gonna really like the books. But I took a lot of my, we'll call it like world building formatting cues from them, because that world is huge, but they develop it slowly in such a great way over 9 books. So like the first book is two POVs. It's Miller and Holden.
Hmm.
And you have other characters coming in and out, but those are the two main POVs. And then in the next book, I believe it's still only two POVs. It's Holden and Bobby. And then you grow it to three POVs. And then at one point they've got four. And then another book they jump to a bunch. But like you grow with it. And
Hmm.
I was like, I'm kind of doing the same because I've seen what you're talking about in books, and the POVs, there's, you know, they're just too many all over the place, or it's not structured correctly and you've got to jump to a random POV and it makes it kind of difficult. And I wanted to avoid that. So I was like, I'm going to try to write this thing so I have two main POVs, and they are the ones that will actually take you through the whole series. And then
Hmm.
we will insert new POVs as the books go along. So there's an Oceanid POV in the second book, and so now we have three. And then there will be a new one in the third book, and then there will be a book that has four, and so you'll get the world will grow slowly, so you get a sense that the world is this
Hmm.
big. But yeah, you get to really invest in two characters in a small world, knowing that it's bigger. And so I really, that was very important for me to try to kind of figure out.
Yeah, I think that was a really good call because if you are going to kind of expand it later on and have more point of views than just those two. At least like if you're doing it gradually and introducing these gradually, then the reader's already familiar with some of those characters.
Yes.
So it's not like they're learning all of this at once, where it's like, oh look, like now it's like the seventh point of view and I've never really gotten to know any of these characters yet. So like who's who, like, and trying to keep track, but like they already
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
the
And
characters well at that point
yeah,
in
and
yours.
I'm a formula guy too. So I've got this formula that I've kind of set out. So like the prologue is always the same characters. This we didn't even talk about the eldritch monsters, but I've got these big eldritch beings called deep ones,
Okay.
and the prologue is always going to be this character named Yuhulte, which is basically your Cthulhu stand-in.
I was just gonna say
And
this is very Lovecraftian. I love it.
yes, yeah, there's
So
definitely
yeah.
Lovecraftian elements, and
Uh-huh.
so we every prologue in the book in each book we will learn a little more of his story because it's very integral to the overall lore, and so we'll always start with him and you'll learn a little bit more, which I think might turn people off a little bit on the first book if they're like, what is this?
Mhm.
But for some people they might just ignore it. But I think when you get to the second one you'll be like, okay, I see what's happening here. And then the epilogue of each book is always the next POV to be introduced in the upcoming book. So
Okay.
the Oceanid character who's in the book, their POV is introduced in the epilogue of the first book. And I think you'll get that format once you get in the second. You're like, okay, I see.
Hmm.
And I'm just I just like formulas, and so that was
Yeah.
the formula I kind of set forward, and that's what we're going with. Some of the POVs are completely new, but again, you'll get introduced in epilogue. Eventually, we're going to get some POVs of characters that we've heard of or we've seen as side characters, and so yeah, trying to keep them coming in ways that are accessible.
Hmm. So I love a good prologue. I also love a good epilogue. But have you heard? This is new to me. I only heard this recently that apparently on particularly on like the writing subreddits, even though I'm not like I don't really interact with people on there. I just read stuff that people are posting. But um, people discourage new authors from writing prologues, and they act
Yeah.
like it is some sort of sin. And I don't get it. Like, have you heard that you've heard that before? Because
I don't know if I've heard
it's
that specifically, but
bizarre.
like when I told my wife I was writing prologue, she was like, "Ooh, be careful," you know. And but it's like it's fantasy, and I know it's
Yeah.
not for every genre, but fantasy, like, and I did get one. I have actually had one kind of critical review that was like the prologue did nothing for me. I hope that'll change because I think as the prologue stays the same character, you'll see the
Hmm.
purpose of it. But they were kind of like the prologue and epilogue did nothing. I was like, well, that's a risk I took.
Yeah.
But it's fantasy. They're the epic scope it allows itself for that. You're thinking of like in a movie terms. You know, you've got that scene in the beginning, like Game of Thrones. You watch the Game of Thrones that first episode, or you read the book, and that kid in the forest and the monsters, like that doesn't come back for a while.
Yeah.
And it's tangentially related. To it, it's so captivating. And then the way you end, you think about it, the way you like begin and end a movie with different things, especially if you're talking about a story that's got much bigger scope than just the story you're reading. That's what those can do for you.
I just feel like it fits in fantasy and
Yes,
sci-fi because sci-fi and
yes,
fantasy
sci-fi
are
too.
like they're like the same. They're so similar in so many ways.
They are.
But
The
but
Expanse uses prologues and epilogues, and I love that.
absolutely,
The Expanse
yeah.
is like it reads like a fantasy series, but is a sci-fi series. It just
Hmm.
it has very similar aspects to it. I
Yeah,
think
I
if you check the books
downloaded
out, you're gonna love
them.
it.
I bought them and I started to read the first one, and then just life got in the way, and I have not picked it back up. But because I really I don't read enough. Like, I really don't. I'm like one of the
I
like
know it's
most
hard.
poorly read authors. I swear to God. But but so yes, like prologues and stuff I feel like are perfectly suitable with fantasy and sci-fi. And then another thing that is suitable for fantasy and is like a hallmark of fantasy is magical systems. So
Yes.
you have supernatural beings in your stories. You're talking about like elder gods and stuff like that. Is there magic? also in
There
there?
is,
Because
and
I know you said in the board game that there was magical systems, so I want to see if it translated over to the book as well.
there is. It definitely skews a little more into the science realm. So there's really some science fiction, steampunk vibes to it. I don't know how familiar you are with the terms like soft magic versus hard magic.
Not
Um,
really. I know hard sci-fi versus soft sci-fi,
yeah,
but that's it. Yeah.
similar ideas. So like soft magic is a magic system that you don't really explain the rules to. The power sources are kind of unknown, and it can kind of do what you need it to do in the moment.
Hmm.
Versus a hard magic system is essentially science. Like you boil it down and you figure out how it ticks. And more people are like leaning into hard magic because
Hmm.
we're liking that as we see like what are the rules behind it. So mine's kind of a hard magic system. So like the magic system essentially is enchanted sea glass. There's all this sea glass rolling around in the ocean that was divinely blessed by the powers when the gods went to war. There's a ton more to that, and so there's like secrets to this stuff that we're going to learn, but this is basically the gist of what the people in the books know, so
Hmm.
that's kind of what I give the people that I'm trying to get to read the books.
Okay.
So you have this enchanted sea glass, and so it does different things once it's activated. And so they call them stones, but so like they have their air stone, brine stone, pressure stone, sight stone, charge stone, and smolder stone. That's kind of like the 6 known type of sea glass. And so like the air, brine, pressure, and sight, you can put that in a mask, and that's you have a diving mask now. The air stone creates gases that basically creates an artificial oxygen for you. The pressure stone creates a gas that kind of equalizes the pressure in your body so you can dive into greater depths. And the sight stone allows you to see, and the brine stone kind of works the salt content in your body and kind of keeps out the cold and keeps your body moist, hydrated essentially.
Hmm. Yeah.
It basically allows you to survive underwater. Or you can put them into submarines, which they call undercrafts, or you can put them into engines. So like there's an engine called an ACE engine, which is an airstone consumption engine. And so it uses air stones, crunches them up, stores the built up magic pressure in a silo, releases that, and it is now has a motor essentially, and it consumes. So that's the technology which is from the magic system.
That's
So
cool because
that's the
you
main
don't
magic
always,
system.
yeah, you don't always combine technology and
No.
magic in that way. Like I feel like a lot of people treat them as so separate and like
Yeah.
opposed. That it's really cool to hear. I've never seen that where you're actually using a kind of magic and technology together.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
I think it all kind of depends on where your magic comes from. And so, like with item based magic, like the logical thing would be, especially if it's in abundance, like people would work it into their technologies, right?
Hmm.
And so, there's a new magic system that's part of what's corrupting the waters that we kind of start to see is there's this kind of more sinister magic system, but it also has its own set of rules. And I won't give away what it is. Of course, you find out pretty quick,
Hmm.
but that's kind of the alternate force to the sea glass. Then you do have the eldritch beings, and as we start to see more of them, you do understand that there is a deeper. I hate to quote Narnia, but like a deeper magic. Like there's an
Hmm.
eldritch magic that like humans just don't have access to, and that one won't ever really be explained because it's eldritch magic. Like you
Hmm.
just can't explain it, and so there are some things that's like I even have I
Yeah.
have a magic source that I call it's the unknowable power. Like you just
Hmm.
won't know what it is
Yeah, it's
because
just like
it
kind of a
came from another.
transcendent thing
Yeah,
that like that we couldn't
exactly.
really
Yeah,
fathom. Yeah.
it came from another world. I know the rules to it,
Hmm.
but the humans don't. But the sea glass is the magic system.
That's really cool. I like that a lot, and I feel like a lot of the people watching because I, I know that not every fantasy story has magic. Like I shouldn't really say that it
Yeah, not all.
necessarily does, but certainly the people on TikTok that I've interacted with and who kind of follow me, who do write fantasy, are really into magical systems.
Yeah,
So I think that yours is really unique sounding, and I think people will find it really interesting. So we're running low on time now, so I'm going to start directing people over to your books, having left off on that, which I think is a really cool hook to get people into it because again, like that's just we always try, especially as indie authors, to like try to find ways to set our books aside from other ones in our own genre. Because you know, like we don't want to admit that we're competing for readers' time or money or attention, but like we are, and
Yeah, yeah.
people, but and you know, so you want it to be different and not in like a forced way, but just like an original kind of way.
It's got to stand out.
And
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And yours really does with that. Like that's a very cool idea. And then even just like ocean punk, generally speaking, like that's something I haven't seen yet among the books that I've kind of looked through for these interviews, and then ones that just, you know, like browsing on TikTok and interacting
Yeah.
with people and seeing their work. I haven't seen this yet. And it's very cool. So I really encourage everyone who is watching, especially if you like fantasy, and even if you don't, like if your fantasy is not really your thing, I think that you'll find something interesting about this, because it is set apart in a lot of ways. Go check out Seth's books. We've got Corrupted Tides, which is book 1, and Tainted Seas, book 2. If you're the kind of person who has sensitive ears and eyes and is really bothered by anything sort of raunchy or crass, then we do have clean versions
That's
available.
right.
So you could check those out instead and not offend your virgin ears. But go check out those books. And if you want to read a shorter version, like a novella, in the meantime, you could always check out Salvage, which is an Eldritch Depth story. All of these are available on Amazon right now. I'll put links in the description. So Seth, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
This was cool. And I
Yeah.
would
Thanks for having me.
yeah, I'd really like to do a part 2 sometime, if
Yeah.
you'd be okay with that, because I feel like we both probably could have talked a lot longer than this. But my computer is like really old. It's from like 2018, and I feel like the memory is probably, it's like three megabytes left.
It's yelling
So
at you. Yeah.
yeah, but no, I would really like to continue that because it's really cool. And since I know that you're planning on releasing more books, you still have 5 more in the series that you
Yep.
could put out, and you're going to be doing it fairly regularly. It'll be really cool to talk to you again, especially after like the
Yeah.
next one's out. So yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. No, this is a blast. So thanks for having me. And
Yeah, of
yeah, I
course.
would love to come back on.
Cool. Well, if anyone who's watching, if you are an indie author and you would be interested in appearing on Rough Rider, please send me an email. It's roughrider@protonmail.com. And please make sure to include what your time zone is, because I keep forgetting to ask people that. And it's really, really hard to schedule these videos when I have some people who are in like Europe right now. So it's not easy. Actually, Australia was the hardest one to organize because he's like a
Oh,
day ahead. So yeah, he's living in the future. So perfect sci-fi subject. So yeah. Anyway, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and God bless you all.